Hi everybody, welcome back to Capricorn Radio. This is your host James and I am super excited about today's guest. We are going to be speaking to journalist Linda Moulton Howe. Important that I do a full biography on Linda today. She is a prolific researcher, a graduate of the Stanford University with a master's degree in communication. She's devoted her life to documentary film, television and radio, to productions concerning science, medicine and the environment. Ms. Howe has received local, national and international awards, including 3 regional Emmys and a national Emmy nomination. Those films have included Poison in the Wind and A Sun-Kissed Poison, which compared smog pollution in Los Angeles and Denver. Fire in the Water about hydrogen was an alternative energy source to fossil fuels. A Radioactive Water about uranium contamination of public drinking water in Denver suburbs. And A Strange Harvest, which explored the worldwide animal mutilation mystery, which has haunted the United States and other countries from the mid-20th century to date. Linda has also received honours as a medical producer in Boston's WCVB Station Excellence Peabody Award, receiving the Aviation and Space Writers Association Award for Writing Excellence in Television, Sigma Delta Chi Excellence in Journalism Award, a Chicago Film Festival Golden Plaque for A Radioactive Water, a National Emmy Award nomination for Poison in the Wind and A Sun-Kissed Poison. There is so much to Linda's biography that I can't go into today. It's as best as I can read out, but for the moment, you can follow along on earthfiles.com. That's Linda's website, earthfiles.com. You can read all about Linda there and the journalism that she does. And today, we're going to get into what kickstarted this all off for Linda and also hopefully touch on Gobekli Tepe. So without further ado, let's bring on today's guest. Hi Linda, you're very welcome to the show.
Well, thank you very much and congratulations for doing Capricorn Radio and sharing with audiences some of these subjects that are not reaching people with the facts that they should.
Like I said just before we came on air, you're one of the top journalists in this field. Linda, been all around the world, chasing down stories, looking for the scoop. And these are the stories and the matters that others don't want to touch, other journalists. And either they're afraid, but what I like about you though, Linda, is that you don't drop your brain out. You look for the source material. You look for the heart of the story, you analyse it rationally and logically, and, you know, I have to lay credit to you. You're one of a kind in that respect, and quite a tenacious career you've had.
Well, you know, James, if you go back to when I graduated from Stanford University, and my focus was on producing documentaries that included for the Stanford University Medical Center, for the Stanford Linear Accelerator, and then I was covering hard news in science and environment and medicine. And when you have that as your context and your ground, 11 years later, in 1979, I'm director of special projects at the CBS station in Denver, Colorado. And that is when there was an upsurge in headlines in local media, not just in Colorado, but the surrounding region going up into Canada. But because I was based in Denver, I was paying attention to an increase in headlines again about what were described as the bloodless, trackless animal mutilations. And it was one of those moments in life you do not know that your curiosity to get to the bottom of what might be an environmental contamination story is going to take you on a path through an Alice in Wonderland mirror, and that eventually, 36 years later, now I look back, and it was the decision in September of 79 to try to get to the bottom of the bloodless, trackless animal mutilations with exactly the same approach that I have had to everything I've ever done. Go for evidence, try to go to the best experts on any subject that you can, and try to build some kind of a case that is based on fact and present it to the public. And in that case, the 90-minute special, A Strange Harvest. I had no idea, James, at the beginning in September of 79, that 9 months later, 18 hours a day, just laying down to get some rest. That's all, because it was that totally overwhelming and absorbing to try to deal with everything that was happening, work with a crew, be on the road for a month, trying to move day to day to day to news. It was like making an ethnographic documentary. And at the end, when I look back, one of the voices in all of that work that I did over those 9 months, one of the first voices was the one that set me on, I think, the most accurate journey in terms of Sheriff. He was had just retired. It was Sheriff Tex Graves from Logan County. And I went up to see him, my very first interview without camera, before we went on the road. And in an office, it was a vacuum cleaner shop that he had started after retiring from the sheriff's office. So he was a little bit more able to talk with me, quite frankly. Mm-hmm. And he showed me a lot of Polaroid photos that he had personally taken of the bloodless, trackless, bizarre animal mutilations. And he said to me, "Let me save you some time, Linda. The perpetrators of these animal mutilations are creatures from outer space." That was the first voice of the many that I interviewed who was saying without any qualification that what was behind the global animal mutilations, and those in Colorado, were creatures from outer space or extraterrestrials. And I can still remember feeling like somebody had hit me with a 220-volt circuit. I was so shocked because there was nothing in my life of science, medicine, and the environment that prepared me for that moment, talking with a sheriff, that he would be saying that this subject that I was just beginning to investigate and was thinking that it might be some sort of an animal contamination story that the government was somehow secretly in. And he said, the perpetrators are creatures from outer space. Well, over the next 9 months, all of the various people, including ranchers who had seen beams of light come down into a pasture, and there they found a mutilated animal, or others who actually saw in Oregon, in a very remote area, saw it was one of the cattle being raised up in a beam of light and then found later mutilated. Mm-hmm. And hearing stories from rancher after rancher saying, "I saw this red, orange, fiery looking sphere over my barn. I thought the barn was on fire. I run out screaming for people to come help me." Mm-hmm. And the fire rose up from the barn, took up into the air, and then took off. I heard so many stories like that. Wow. And I think for your listeners mm-hmm. around the world, that there's one particular case that Sheriff Graves showed me that would sort of summarize why this is a phenomena that once you've been exposed, I personally was never able to let go of wanting to understand more and why the government had a cover up about it and has had a cover up about it since World War II. And here is the case. I
want to spend some time on this ufology, and I know there's so many aspects to your journalism, Linda. Ufology took a different turn, in my perspective anyway. It took a different dynamic. The strangeness of the ufology went off the charts with respect to animal mutilations. This was tangible evidence for the first time that something was doing this. It's something that you can measure and quantify. This tangible evidence. Yes, there is eyewitness testimony, but people could have brushed this all away. Ufology is just something that people are making up. Lights in the sky could be anything. You know, people could have brushed this away before the cattle mutilations. But with respect to the cattle mutilations, it's tangible evidence. And ufology just took a different turn from that point onwards.
If I'm understanding what you're saying, it is the animal mutilations themselves that is the largest body of physical evidence, forensic evidence around this planet for decades. Mm-hmm. And that it's indisputable about how highly strange it is, and it parallels the human abduction syndrome, which opened up the whole issue of hybrids and clones. And the case that I was going to tell you that Sheriff Graves showed me in that vacuum cleaner meeting where we were in his office, that it sets the stage for why my mind opened up in 1979, probably as much about this case that I'm going to share with you now as anything that ends up leading, I think, to why the hybridization and the cloning are such a very important part of understanding this phenomenon. Now, what I would like to do is just lay out this brief case that Sheriff Graves showed me. Please. It was a series of color Polaroid photos that he had taken himself. It was in the state of Colorado. It was up in Logan County. It was a bull that was lying on very powdery ground. There were no tracks around this body whatsoever, and yet the ground looked like like you had emptied face powder around this animal. And the sheriff said, as they approached, they tried not to walk anywhere that would be clear. They wanted to look for tracks first. So he and the deputy made a big circle around this big, large, heavy animal that was lying with its front hooves perfectly together, the back hooves perfectly together. He said it was as if somebody had posed it for some kind of a photo. And he could see an ear missing eye, tongue, jaw flesh, genitals, and rectum were cored out, standing from a distance because they didn't want to stand anywhere on that powdery ground until they had photographs. And then, once they had the photographs and they approached the body, they realized that the head was down 8 inches in a hole in the ground. And he said, and I could see this in this Polaroid, it was so strange. Wow. And he said the only thing that we could conclude is that something had the ability to paralyze, to hold this big, large male animal down on the ground where it was found, and did not paralyze the neck muscles, and that the animal in some form of agony could move its head, dug an 8-inch hole, while the rest of the body was literally immobile. There was not a single line where the normally feet you would see signs of struggle. And the sheriff said to me, we are dealing with force. We are dealing with a phenomenon. We are dealing with creatures from outer space that have the ability to paralyze large animals on the ground or take them up in beams of light and take away the tissue and the fluid. Well, that was the strangest case that I was first introduced to, and many more later. And eventually, when A Strange Harvest was first broadcast in a 90-minute special on May 25th, 1980, I was trying to hold the door open then, and especially throughout the 80s, that no matter how repulsive, no matter how terrible the animal mutilation seemed, that it might be that creatures from outer space, as the sheriff said, had a need, and that need might have to do with their survival, and that there is something about this whole phenomena that over the years, whether you're dealing with animal mutilations or you're dealing with the human abduction syndrome or you're dealing with whistleblowers from governments, there comes the same theme, that we are dealing with more than one type of non-human, and that at least one of them has a really serious survival issue, and that everything related to the human abduction syndrome and to the animal mutilations is because they need to harvest genetic material from this planet for them to stay alive. When you get to that moment in this dialogue, the next huge question that remains unanswered: what is the relationship between the non-humans that need genetic material from this planet and the history of Earth. Why would any life form in the universe be focused on this planet unless they had a very intimate relationship with the past? And that might be why they are coming to Earth in the 20th and the 21st centuries or earlier to gather genetic material to help keep them alive, because it may be that in the 21st century that something happens to Earth that makes collecting genetic material no longer healthy, that it won't be as good because of something that happens on the Earth. That has been suggested in some of the abduction cases as well. And therefore, all of it, every facet of this phenomena, including the difficult to understand animal mutilations, focus everything down to here we are, 2015. Animal mutilations have been going on for decades, probably centuries, according to government whistleblowers to me. The human abduction syndrome, first publicly released in 1961, Betty and Barney Hill in New Hampshire, but probably going on for millennia. So we are at a crossroads. Whistleblowers have told me this. People in the human abduction series of phenomena have told me we are at the most critical crossroad, because whatever the future has holding out there, non-humans have been using Earth life in order to survive, is one of the prominent theories. If that is the case, and there is something very critical about timelines, as if the doors are closing now down to 2015, 2016, 2017, that there will be a timeline that we will all be going on. Will it include, finally, the announcement around the world that we're not alone in the universe and a straightforward introduction of the life forms that have been using and terraforming this planet for millennia? That is what I hope. But if it doesn't occur, what kind of future will humanity have if we constantly are living on a concocted planet?
There's a lot of sentiment that we're going to be replaced by hybrids, and there's a lot of speculation of a genetic harvest for good reasons, for bad reasons. What do you see looking at the evidence? What's your sentiment, feeling, speculation from what you have seen as a researcher, as a motive? Do you see this motive as good, sinister? Do you think we're under a threat as a species? Do you see it as something we shouldn't get too concerned about, or, concentrating on the fact that we are being visited, that yes, there is maybe a survival thing going on for other entities, and that they may need this genetic harvest or cattle mutilations for some personal needs?
It's an excellent question. And the first thing that I would say to you and your listeners is that the one constant strength that I have had over the last 36 years of trying to deal with all of this schizophrenic material that on any given hour or day can seem negative or positive is that I firmly, I guess in my soul, in my gut, feel a real link to what I call the divine field, that all of us, if we are conscious, that there is an ally in the divine field. And the divine field, from my point of view, is responsible for all matter worlds. If there's an infinite number of universes, then the divine field is what produced them all. Now, having said that, I'm trying to set the context that all matter, all life in this universe or other universes is in a dynamic with the same divine field, even if it manifests as something that we would call evil or angelic in the matter world. When you come to what has been revealed in the last year or two, and not much before, and 2 years ago, I was introduced, well, it started at the end of 2013 and then mostly 2014. I was introduced to two very important related books and did a whole series at Earth Files and broadcast on Coast to Coast AM and Whitley Strieber's Dreamland Online, and it just caused a gigantic reaction from audiences everywhere. And those books are Rachel's Eyes and UFO Highway. In Rachel's Eyes is the story of a hybrid in Sacramento, California, part ET, part human. UFO Highway is a story about hybrids underground in Dulce, New Mexico. Both sources carried the title of U.S. Air Force Colonel, but neither Air Force Colonel knew about the other. So they're two different investigations that parallel and end up telling a very similar story about clones and hybrids in two very different parts of the United States. And James, when you compare Rachel's Eyes and you compare UFO Highway, Rachel's Eyes is a story about the daughter of the author who, this goes back into 1993, 94 time period, but the book didn't come out until around 2010. And what, if you boil it all down, it is a U.S. Air Force colonel who goes to American River College in Sacramento and asks about a placing of his daughter, who he tells the college has physical disabilities and that she needs a special kind of roommate. And it turned out that it was actually the very same week that the daughter of the author of Rachel's Eyes had gone to the school saying that she was blind, physically blind, but that she had agreed with her mother to get an apartment and try on her own as a freshman in college to go to college and live in an apartment and see if she could do it. That was something that mattered to the daughter very much.
Wow.
And
wow.
The book, I just was reaching for the book, so that it is copyright and very important to your listeners to know that this is, I think, one of the most important books to read of all time. Mm-hmm. I didn't get the copy till 2010, but it was first published in a limited edition in 2005 by Helen Luttrell, Littrell. She was the mother of the blind daughter who ended up living with the quote-unquote disabled daughter of the U.S. Air Force colonel, and that the two girls in the same apartment at American River College in Sacramento end up, one cannot see, that is Helen Luttrell's daughter, cannot see. The other, it turns out, is an extraterrestrial hybrid, defined as such by the U.S. Air Force colonel to Helen Luttrell and Helen's daughter in a face-to-face discussion in their apartment, because Helen Luttrell had come to the apartment to visit her daughter and to be introduced to the new disabled student that had been placed by the college with her daughter, her blind daughter. And as Helen Luttrell was standing at the beginning, at the open of the door where her daughter was, the Rachel, that is the hybrid, this Rachel comes out carrying books. She has a scarf on her head. She has on glasses, dark glasses. She has on clothes covering up almost every part of her body. And as she comes forward, she tripped on the rug, on the floor. And Helen Luttrell, the mother, grabs her lower wrist to hold her up. And as she told me in an interview, Linda, it was like grabbing plastic. I could not feel bone. It was spongy. And when she meant plastic, she meant like a spongy plastic ball.
Sure.
And she said, I realized that as I grabbed, and it was not a human feeling arm at all, she said the black glasses tipped forward on Rachel's face, and that she was staring at olive, or not olive really, more avocado, like the green around the center nut in an avocado. It would be that light green. She called it a light avocado green. The eyes were solid. She compared them to look like looking at Jell-O. If you can imagine avocado green Jell-O, all solid, no whites, but at the center of each eye, she was staring at the vertical pupil of a snake or a cat. And it was so shocking to her, to the mother, hanging onto her arm, that she jerked back, and that Rachel went on hurriedly, no discussion of any kind. And the daughter said she could talk, but it was not in a normal voice. Okay, now, because that occurred, apparently Rachel went and told the Air Force colonel that the Helen Luttrell mother had seen her eyes and had grabbed her wrist, and she must not know, or she must by then know that she wasn't human. So the U.S. Air Force colonel called up, arranged a meeting, and all three sat down together. Rachel, it was actually four. It was Helen Luttrell and her daughter and the U.S. Air Force colonel and Rachel. And it was in that meeting that the colonel explains the whole story about a hybridization program that he has been working with and for going back into like the 1950s or 60s, and that there was a hybridization program from the 50s underground between Rachel, the town of Rachel, which is where Rachel got her name,
Sure.
and Area 51's S4. And that it was all true, that underground in that area are extraterrestrials, craft, hybrids, clones, a hybridization program that the U.S. Air Force colonel said he had been working with for a very long time. Now, after all of this and huge details in this extremely important book that was published in 2005, Rachel's Eyes, the book goes into some of the greatest detail about the hybrids and why the hybridization program. And it goes back to Zeta Reticuli 1 and 2. That is the Betty and Barney Hill named solar system, 37.9 light years from Earth.
Yep.
And it parallels the entire concept that I discussed earlier about animal mutilations, that we are dealing with non-humans that are having a really serious survival problem, and that it is necessary for this one group from Zeta Reticuli 1 and 2 to try to develop hybrids that could live in the oxygen-rich air atmosphere of this planet, because they have to leave or have had to leave their original solar system. Now, interestingly enough, that scenario, a kind of exodus from Zeta Reticuli 1 and 2, for reasons that are not absolutely clear but are detailed more so, jump over to Dulce. This is a book that came out called UFO highway. Are you ready for the truth?
We're just coming up to break, so just for the webpage, you can go to capricornradio.com for the free archives and capricornmembers.com for the HD TV and MP3 archives. But for now, we're going to take a quick break and we'll be back in just a moment. There is something majestic in the land of Ireland. This is known the world over. The Celtic Irish are descendants of the Tuatha De Danann, a mysterious, supernatural race of gods written about in ancient Irish Gaelic texts. This is the basis for all Irish mythology, and our megalithic ancestors are interlinked with these peoples. You have a chance to come and see these monuments and temples for yourself. The megalithic landscape is rich in the realms of myth, legend and wisdom. Come see all this on the most spectacular Sacred Sites tour in March 2016. The Sacred Sites and Equinox tour is not to be missed. Tour highlights include Grinnin of Ailloch Observatory, the Giant's Ring Henge and Dolmen, St. Patrick's Day Special at St. Patrick's Ancient Chair, March 17th, Knockmany Passage Tomb linked to the Queen Maeve with special access, Beemore Temple Complex, Dunluce Castle, the Giant's Causeway, Beltany Stone Circle, Kilclooney Dolmen, and the Loughcrew Equinox Event Alignment. Of course, we will see the famous tombs of Newgrange, Noth and Doth, also Fornox Rock Art and Shamanic Chamber, Tara Hill Complex, and we're going to finish at the Tuatha De Danann's origins in the northwest of Ireland at Carrowkeel, dated 3500 BC, and the famous Carrowmore 5000 BC complex. Check out all the full itinerary on the Tours Events page for more details at jamesswagger.com. Welcome back to Capricorn Radio. This is your host James, and don't forget to check out the archives at capricornmembers.com. You can subscribe for membership, doing a lifetime membership deal at the moment. And of course you can still check out the free archives at capricornradio.com. And then HD TV shows as well on the Capricorn members page. But for now,
this was a book based on a recorded interview that Anthony Sanchez in California did also with an Air Force, U.S. Air Force colonel. And this was originally published also as a very, very limited edition in 2010. Then more were released in 2011, updated. And now in 2015, Anthony Sanchez and Helen Luttrell are trying to keep both of these rare books out for people to read. And everywhere I go, I say these are two of the most important books on the planet because I think that they are telling the truth through U.S. Air Force colonels about why we have UFOs, why there are abductions, why there are animal mutilations, why there is a government cover-up. The governments apparently understand the issues. They do not want the public to understand that governments have been making trade-offs of getting technology that is advanced for weapon systems and for other applications, while giving an okay to extraterrestrials to do genetic harvest by mutilating animals, taking some humans, plants. And that means that we have a kind of human decision at a power level to work with non-humans, allowing non-humans to harvest genetic material from this planet, which means animal mutilations and human abductions. And in exchange, the governments get advanced technologies that they can use to build weapon systems and other technologies. and that this is the underbelly that the governments have been trying to hide as it has evolved since World War II. In the UFO highway, the Sanchez interview with that U.S. Air Force colonel, he also says the source of the extraterrestrials underground at Dulce is Zeta Reticuli 1 and 2, but has a much more complicated taxonomy and history having to do with two planets in a large solar system between Zeta Reticuli 1 and 2, which I believe are a fourth or an eighth of a light year apart. They are a binary star system, but they are very, very distant. The suns are very distant, and there's definitely room for a large solar system. And the story in the shortest form is, millions of years ago, there was a war between a tall, pale humanoid civilization on one planet and the short, grayish, possibly lizard or reptilian skinned grays. That part is not exactly clear. And the war had to do with the talls gathering genetic material to take to their planet to build robots, androids to do work. It's odd. It's almost a humanized motive or agenda that throughout, if all of this is true, it would mean that intelligence throughout the universe always has the same issues. Survival, getting people to work for you to do the boring slave labor. And one of these tall beings in the planet that has the tall ones starts making androids and robots for the tall ones, harvesting from the short grays. That was the reason for the war. The grays were very angry. And that this war kept going on through exodus from Zeta Reticuli 1 and 2, going into other solar systems and ending up in this solar system, first on Mars, where these two extraterrestrial groups had another war that damaged that planet, and then they ended up on Earth. And a lot of people hearing this would say, well, this sounds like Battlestar Galactica. This sounds like Star Trek. Well, I'll tell you, all the way back in 1983, when I started working on a special for Home Box Office, that was going to be a documentary going beyond my documentary on the animal mutilations that was A Strange Harvest, Home Box Office contracted me to do an hour that would be UFOs, the ET factor. And in the context of going forward in that work, of trying to see if I could get whistleblowers, if I could tell more information about what could be the agendas and the reasons, all the way back to that period of time, the story was that something had happened on Mars and that Earth was the recipient of non-humans that were in a war. And in 1983, when I was at Kirtland Air Force Base and I was shown an alleged briefing paper for the President of the United States, all in an effort to produce that HBO special, one of the sentences in the briefing paper, allegedly for a president, said, these extraterrestrial biological entities have warred, and it was warred with each other for at least 300 years. So that was in a 1983 briefing document. Today, in 2015, we now have these two very important books, UFO Highway about Dulce, New Mexico, having a huge hybrid program underground there, and Rachel's Eyes about Sacramento, California links to Area 51 S4 underground hybridization program. And James, even if Battlestar Galactica and Star Trek and all of those fiction stories that we've seen on television are considered fiction, my sense of it is from other whistleblowers who have talked to me because they knew some of the background about how those scripts came to be approved and put into television, including the Star Trek, that these were all done through government sanction behind the scenes, behind the matrix, because there are people who want to know in the UK and the US governments, if these stories are put out in fiction, what is the public's response? I think that what UFO Highway and Rachel's Eyes have laid out about a hybridization program that includes cloning as well, that they are basically telling the truth, and that the governments have always felt, as they discovered all of this, that humans would go crazy and there would be panic and civilization would collapse. So I'm going to turn this around to you and say, if everything I've laid out about these two very important works concerning hybridization programs of ETs and humans on this planet is the truth, what is your, James Swagger, reaction in terms of England, Scotland, Ireland, Europe, the United States, and around the world being able to hear this and not fall down?
I think in the UK, Ireland, Europe region, there's a different response, a different attitude to this stuff, Linda. Personally, my own response, I grew up with a father who was very encouraging of the unexplained and mysteries and encouraged me to pursue this. He's also a hypnotist, a healer, an engineer, a very, very alternative guy. I say if there is UFOs or entities up there, I say big deal. The question is, why are they here? What is their agenda? Let's talk about that issue. I know everybody's not like that. But, and something you alluded to there was the topic of government complicity. Let's address that one. That's the big one for me, Linda.
This is the area that I got a problem with, and not with the UFOs. It's what basically, we're talking hybrids, we're talking mutilations. And let's say Roswell was the meeting point where the aliens and the government met for the first time, although it may have been before that, but let's say that was the meeting ground. Roswell, are there a bunch of renegade aliens just being let do what they want to do on this planet, or is there any monitoring by the governments, or is it, hey, we've got all this super technology, you guys just go and do what you want?
Well, I'll tell you what I think has been emerging as a clearer and clearer picture about not just 47. That wasn't really the beginning of UFO crashes at all, but the government would like everybody to think it was. What happened in Cape Girardeau, Missouri in 1941, as far as I know, and Bob and Ryan Wood and others with majestic documents, we were retrieving both bodies alive and dead and technology in Missouri in 1941, a full 6 years before 47. But for the sake of discussion of audiences that at least have heard of Roswell, this is my understanding. It took a while, but our government began to understand that the bodies that they were retrieving, dead and a few alive, from a variety of many, many different sites throughout New Mexico, not just Roswell, is that they were dealing with androids. They knew this for sure by the time Eisenhower became president. Wow. And he had been our general in Europe under Truman, and Truman was obviously trying to ride this difficult story throughout his presidency about extraterrestrials. And that when they realized that they were dealing with bodies that a surgeon putting a scalpel down was not cutting through tissue, that was a case that was described to me from Wright-Patterson. One of the bodies flown from Roswell went to Wright-Patterson, and they were working on it. They wanted to do an autopsy, and the scalpel would not go through, but looked to the surgeon like skin. And they then were completely confused, but came to the conclusion They were not dealing with strictly organic bodies, that whatever they were sophisticated. They could be part biological and part some sort of machine. That is the description. A biological robot would be an android. And that from that point on, it was an evolution of the government realizing that whatever the prime intelligence or intelligences were behind all of these bodies, technologies that they were finding, that we were not dealing with the prime intelligence. We were largely dealing with androids, and then came the revelation about hybridization and clones. And so today, in 2015, in many ways, James, you look at the planet of 7.2 billion body containers around the world. What percentage might be ET human hybrids right now in 2015?
Absolutely no idea, Linda. As a percentage, I don't know. I couldn't put a figure on it.
Well, let's just say that there's a percentage. Then Neanderthal never knew it was being replaced by Cro-Magnon Homo sapiens sapiens.
True.
So what if Cro-Magnon Homo sapiens sapien, in all of its violence, needs to be modified, but that there is something about the creativity and the intelligence and the spirit of the soul of Homo sapiens sapien that is much desired and admired? Then maybe what we are headed toward as we get into the 21st century is going to be a replacement of Cro-Magnon Homo sapiens sapien by a new hybrid, plus all of the interviews now. I just did a wonderful interview with Martin Rees. He is the royal astronomer in England. Mm-hmm. And he has made, along with Hawking and with Bill Gates and Elon Musk, he's also warning that right now, the way things are going, having to do with the rush toward artificial intelligence by humans, that by the end of this century, we could be on the road of replacing humans already in this century with artificial intelligent robots, much more capable of functioning than humans. Those warnings are coming in all directions, and humans have only been around in this form for 35,000 years. So we, in a funny, strange way, are like in an echo chamber. We have had other intelligence interacting with and terraforming this planet for a long time. They need genetic material to keep alive. We come into consciousness 35,000 years ago. We are now at 2015 in the 21st century, and that's all the time that this current model of humanity has been around. And we are already being warned by our greatest scientists that in this century, we could be replaced by artificial intelligence.
You know, I've been told recently by other people in the field of research that the greys, the creatures known or entities known as the greys, whether they're biological or semi-biological beings, that they've lost their curator, and that these are the guys that are tampering with the genetic stock of other species in an effort to have what we have. They want to have a soul, and they want to be able to incarnate like us, and they have a very, very, very small chance of that actually happening, but there is a chance, and that they would do anything to make that possible. However, they are against the odds. They have no curator anymore, and yeah, they're biological or semi-biological beings, which kind of corroborates some of the evidence that people speak about them being cold to touch and stuff like that. But you know, how do you feel about that? What do you think about that?
Well, it's an interesting sidebar to what we've discussed so far, and it reminds me when I did my third book, Glimpses of Other Realities, Volume 2. One big section is with people in the abduction syndrome who had been sending me letters and illustrations of what they had experienced, in which they were introduced to themselves as being allowed to die because they had a heart problem or some problem, and that they have gray beings and praying mantis beings, and in some cases tall, pale entities. There's a mixture of the types of ETs involved in what the abductees have called resurrection technology. But in all of these cases, they've been introduced to the concept that they are allowed to die, quote unquote, in the body container that they came into the UFO craft and the encounter with the various intelligences aboard, and that they are shown that here's their body, the body that they're going to be resurrected in. Their body is in a tube of light. There's light from the top, light from the bottom. The humans are looking and seeing that some of the tubes, they recognize they are definitely humans. They recognize some part of themselves. Other tubes, distinctly not human, very tall, very thin, very different. So it's as if the rooms of these tubes are being used to sustain what I have been introduced to in the last year or so, to the concept of rapid cycle cloning. Rapid cycle cloning is supposed to be an extraterrestrial technology in which they can take genetic material, and they don't have to go to a baby stage. They literally, in these tubes of light, can create full adult bodies. Now, for the sake of argument, let's just say that that is, in fact, a technology that exists. It's been drawn by people in the abduction syndrome. And these people have seen, with the help of a gray being, a praying mantis being, that the form, the aged or diseased body that they came into the craft with, they are shown it will die, or it dies in front of the abductee. But they see gold white light in a kind of feathery form comes out of the back of the nape of the neck. Each person has described that the soul, spirit, entity, the energy, pura vida animation of the body container exits the body from the base of the neck. They draw it that way. Comes out into the air. They watch their soul, spirit move into the cloned adult. It can be the same age or a few years younger, has been generally the description, of themselves. And then, as Linda Porter, one of the people who described and illustrated so much of this in my book, Glimpses of Other Realities, Volume 2, High Strangeness, she extended her arms to me during a recorded interview, and she began to sob as she said, "Linda, I don't even know whose arms these are anymore, whose hands these are. I watched my body die. I watched the light come and enter another body. But Linda, who was watching? What part of me was watching? Whose arms and hands are these?" And that would be the angst of explaining any of this to the general world public, that if this has been going on and there have been efforts to sustain certain humans beyond mortality for reasons that are known only to the extraterrestrials, these are the scenes from those efforts. And to go right to the heart of your question about the relationship between the soul spirit of humanity and gray types or others that might yearn to have a soul with the passion and the compassion and the energy of the human soul, this might explain why back when I was putting together Glimpses Volume 2 with material. It did not come out until 1998, my third book, but I had been working with the material in that book from 1990. I started getting this material that I've just described, 1990, 91, 92. There was a period of time when I was hearing from people. And there was one statement that was made by one of the abductees to me, and this is what they said. Linda, I get the sense that we are dealing with other intelligences who are studying what happens to us, to our soul at the moment of death. And that in that moment of death, the human soul may be going to a dimension that the extraterrestrials cannot go. And they want to find out about that dimension so they can go there too. I've never forgotten that.
Incredible.
And perhaps this is one of those 16-layered chess games, James, where it started out millions of years ago as a war between extraterrestrials in the Zeta Reticuli 1 and 2 solar system. Mm-hmm. And it ended up in this solar system on Mars, and they were still fighting. And then they have to go over to this Earth because of what they did on Mars. And this was an oxygen-rich atmosphere, and it was very difficult for the extraterrestrials of any type to live here unless they created containers, body containers, that could handle the sun and the oxygen of this planet. And that over time, survival became the priority. Then, in the evolution of all of these manipulations of DNA and already evolving primates, they end up creating Neanderthalensis and Cro-Magnon Homo sapiens sapien, and this last model, humans that we are now. Everybody stood back and said, wow, what happened? Who put inside of this humanoid model, this, what was supposed to be an android, a soul of so much energy, so much strength, and that at the moment of death, it is going someplace that none of the extraterrestrials knew existed, and that we could be on the dawn of a whole new revelation, not only that we're not alone in the universe and never have been alone, that non-humans have been coming and going and interacting and terraforming on this planet for millennia, that there is something that is a surprise about the actual unseen part of humanity that is perhaps unique, and that non-humans are so amazed by the spirit that is in the human, even if we're too violent, even if there's all sorts of self-destructive aspects to humanity, that there is something about us that is absolutely extraordinary, and that some ally out there is convinced that must continue in this universe. Something is trying to protect the evolution in the next step, that soul that is in humanity will not be lost.
Linda, we're at the top of the hour. We've got about 20 minutes left, and I want to reserve some time to mention megaliths and Gobekli Tepe. We're just coming up to break, so just for the webpage, you can go to capricornradio.com for the free archives and capricornmembers.com for the HD TV and MP3 archives. But for now, we're going to take a quick break and we'll be back in just a moment. There is something majestic in the land of Ireland. This is known the world over. The Celtic Irish are descendants of the Tuatha De Danann, a mysterious, supernatural race of gods written about in ancient Irish Gaelic texts. This is the basis for all Irish mythology, and our megalithic ancestors are interlinked with these peoples. You have a chance to come and see these monuments and temples for yourself. the megalithic landscape is rich in the realms of myth, legend and wisdom. Come see all this on the most spectacular Sacred Sites tour in March 2016. This Sacred Sites and Equinox tour is not to be missed. Tour highlights include Gridden of Aileach Observatory, the Giant's Ring Henge and Dolmen, St. Patrick's Day Special at St. Patrick's Ancient Chair, March 17th, Knockmany Passage Tomb linked to the Queen Maeve with special access, Beemore Temple Complex, Dunluce Castle, the Giant's Causeway, Beltany Stone Circle, Kilclooney Dolmen, and the Loughcrew Equinox Event Alignment. Of course, we will see the famous tombs of Newgrange, Noth and Doth, also Fornox Rock Art and Shamanic Chamber, Tara Hill Complex, and we're going to finish at the Tua de Danan's origins in the northwest of Ireland at Carrowkeel, dated 3500 BC, and the famous Carrowmore 5000 BC complex. Check out all the full itinerary on the Tours Events page for more details at jamesswagger.com. Welcome back to Capricorn Radio. This is your host James, and don't forget to check out the archives at capricornmembers.com. You can subscribe for membership, doing a lifetime membership deal at the moment. And of course you can still check out the free archives at capricornradio.com. And then HDTV shows as well on the Capricorn members page. But for now, I know you've been to Hypergene and Malta, fascinating place, megaliths all around the world. I kind of want to sew in the ancient alien question into this as well, in terms of the hypothesis. There's two angles. There's the genetically engineering the human race in ancient times, and then there's the question of the monuments. All these ancient monuments have the ancient alien hypothesis tied in as well. So we're talking Stonehenge, the pyramids, Gobekli Tepe, stuff like that. How do you feel about that ancient alien hypothesis from both aspects? And we already led into that from your last response, but yeah, in a genetic sense and in a megalithic sense.
In 1999 December, a man who had retired from the Defense Intelligence Agency in the United States had worked through a man who worked for the World Bank for 3 weeks to set up a meeting with me. And the meeting was because of my third book, Glimpses of Other Realities, Volume 2, High Strangeness, and that in section I was just talking to you about, having to do with rapid cycle cloning in tubes of light in which bodies could be sustained and into which the soul spirit could be entered, focused to animate these containers. And that during this discussion that was set up with this retired DIA agent, the Defense Intelligence Agency has been intimately involved with retrieval of bodies and craft and technologies of extraterrestrials since its inception. And this man told me, Linda, we have proof, meaning the DIA and the U.S. government, we have proof that at least 3 competing geopolitical, territorial, conflicting extraterrestrial biological civilizations have been interacting with and terraforming this planet Earth for at least 270 million years. I said, that's before the time of the dinosaurs. And he immediately said, Linda, one of these groups made the dinosaurs. The dinosaurs were one of their experiments on this planet.
Wow.
And when I was hearing him say that, I said, what proof, what possible proof could extraterrestrials give to the United States government or any government on this planet that would be proof? Because we're on the petri dish underneath the telescope or the microscope, the extraterrestrials are looking down, so to speak, in this metaphor on us. How would we ever get an objective knowledge, an objective viewpoint on anything that extraterrestrials would say that they did or didn't do on this planet? And there was a beat, and he said, Linda, all I can do is tell you we have proof, but I cannot tell you what it is because it would be too dangerous for you and me. And I've never had an answer beyond that cryptic statement. Let's assume, James, that man who worked 3 weeks through a World Bank guy to have this private meeting with me because of the tube technology, the resurrection technology, the whole issue of souls and bodies in my book, Glimpses of Other Realities, Volume 2, High Strangeness. And he went to all that effort because he wanted to sit down and talk with me about what I had in my 1998 released book that he said he had been introduced to in little compartmentalized pieces during his 23 years of working for the Defense Intelligence Agency, and that he was shocked when he saw my book, saw the big chapter, and said, you've got the huge story there. All the rest of us in my DIA unit, we were just dealing with pieces. He said, that's why I wanted to talk with you. Now, that means that ancient aliens goes back 270 million years, right?
Wow.
So it isn't just 5,000 years ago. It isn't just beginning with Mesopotamia, and here we go to Gobekli. James, when that morning that I have written about and done reports at Earth Files and presented in conferences about my trip to Gobekli Tepe, I start with the moment that we climbed the hill with Dr. Robert Schoch, the geologist who did his PhD at Yale.
Sure.
And he wanted us to have the experience of being on top of the hill when the sun came up and then go down into Gobekli Tepe. And so I wanted to have the experience of facing the sun in the east on the June 13th, 2012 date that I was there. And then as soon as the first beams of sunlight were hitting my eyes, I just, without having any preconceived notion, I just wanted to turn 180 degrees with my back now to the sun, looking at Gobekli Tepe and seeing if I could detect with my eyes where any of those first beams, it wouldn't be the summer solstice on June 21st, but it was pretty close, June 13th. And I am seeing light reflecting off of two of the tall, they are approximately 19 feet tall, weighing tons. They're beautiful, gorgeous they have like T-topped pillars in rings throughout Gobekli Tepe. And what I did was start down the hill onto the ramps that the archaeologists had built so that you could get sort of into the heart of what has been exposed so far and not trample on anything to hurt this archaeological dig. So I got as close as I could go, as close to what I was seeing, the very tip tops of these big T-shaped columns from that sun. And as I stood there, right at the beginning of sunrise, June 13th, 2012, what's just flooded me. Every time I've gone anywhere on the planet, I get a gut intuitive feeling about whether I'm in a place that I feel safe or completely unsafe, whether I feel like I'm in a place that I understand what it is, what has happened there or not. Everywhere on the planet I've been, in both hemispheres, I always get some sort of a intuitive impression. And here I am, right at the heart of the Gobekli Tepe excavation, and I'm getting 0. I had never felt 0 before. I don't understand. This is alien. I'm not getting any impressions of what it's for. Is it positive or negative? What could have made this? And I already knew by then from the deep ground penetrating radar studies that they knew that there were another 20, maybe even another 30 acres of a couple of hundred more rings of these tall, beautiful limestone T-shaped pillars in the hill that it may take 25 more years to excavate it all, because it was all covered by dirt. After it had been built 12,000 years ago, it was all covered back up 11,000 years ago for reasons unknown, by technologies unknown. And what we were in is the excavation that has been being done since 1994 by a real hero, Klaus Schmidt, a PhD archaeologist who was working yearly for a long time without anybody knowing what he was working on because he wanted to protect it. And in 2010, he allowed the public for the first time to know, to see, and people like John Anthony West and Robert Schoch went the summer of 2010. And I talked about the report that they gave me for earthfiles.com, my news website. I talked about it in Ancient Aliens for the fall production of 2010 to 11. And then by 2012, I was going there myself. And in that process, what the Klaus Schmidt had been discovering was extraordinary. He was finding statues. He was finding strange animals we're talking about like 3-dimensional, beautifully carved, amid the tall pillars that people have seen in photos, were all these extraordinary sculptures, quite often of animal creatures that no one knows has ever existed on this planet. And there is one tall totem. It was over 6 feet tall. They moved all of these sculptures that I'm describing now out of the hill and put them in the Sanlurfa Museum where we went to in order to protect them, because, believe it or not, this is the sad part of humanity. People were going to the archaeological dig hill after it was first publicly announced in 2010, and they were stealing. They didn't have money to pay for 365, 24/7, 365 security. So that means that they would work in the day and the hill would be completely exposed at night. And then they realized that people were going and stealing. So security started being brought, and this museum began to be the place to take these invaluable, literally invaluable sculptures. And this one, the one taller than 6 feet, I show it at Earth Files. I have this I've done a DVD now about 12,000-year-old Gobekli Tepe self-activating software and extraterrestrial technology. That's what I do in an hour DVD. Wow. And I show this very clearly, that when you come into the museum and you approach the room, you come from the side and you're seeing the profile of this 6-foot sculpture that is like a totem in Alaska. And it appears to be a series of figures from the top going down. And as you I came into the left of it, it looks like a bizarre, almost monstrous head at the top and snakes coming down the side. And then, as I'm taking photographs and I move slowly to the front of it, the head, the monster head from the side, is completely erased, as if something hit it and knock the face out so it is like a crater at the top. And it comes down strange head after strange head. And then you see that the snakes are the knees of legs of an entity that is lower in the totem. And this entity that had snake-like, looked like snakes on the side, legs to the front, is giving birth out of a pubis to what looks like a human child. And I stood absolutely stunned. This is an over 6 foot tall, sculpted totem that is 12,000 years old by carbon dating. And it was telling the story that I read at Kirtland Air Force Base on April 9th, 1983, as a producer working on a home box office documentary. And that the paragraph in that paper came flooding into my mind as I stood there in a state of shock, looking at this totem. And what that paragraph said in April 9th, 1983 at Kirtland Air Force Base, these extraterrestrial biological entities manipulated DNA in already evolving primates to create Homo sapien.
Wow, my hairs are standing on my arms almost, Linda, listening to the description. This place is awesome. I really can't wait to get my hands in this place and go see this. It you know, the most amazing thing is it just shouldn't be there. It's not that it's unprecedented. It just shouldn't be there in our own, you know, sanitized story of history. It's the Ice Age. It's just what was going on in the Ice Age.
James, exactly. 12,000 years ago, we were coming out of the last big ice age, which reached its peak 18,000 years ago. By 6,000 years later, in 12,000, it was getting warmer. And ice was melting all over the place. And the Mediterranean, this is very, very important. Gobekli Tepe is only 6 miles approximately from the Syrian border, which back then was part of Mesopotamia. Mm-hmm. It was during the last ice age, you can check maps on this. The Mediterranean, which includes that area going toward Gobekli Tepe in that part of Turkey on the Mediterranean, was dry. There was no ice. This was dry and cold. And it was warming up 12,000 years ago when probably something cosmic, comets, meteors, hit this Earth. If we had time, we could go into a whole huge scientific investigation of that period of time now that is equally fascinating. Mm-hmm. And that the extraterrestrials, this is what's implied. Extraterrestrials were on this planet. They were terraforming. They created. It's an extraterrestrial site, is the current hypothesis, Gobekli Tepe, not human. And that the ETs, had knowledge of cosmic events around them and knew that something was coming that was big, and that they, with UFOs, discs, neutralizing gravity technology, covered up that entire hill at what we call the Gobekli Tepe site, which is northeast a little from Sanlurfa, and that it was then covered up 1,000 years after it was first built to protect it, and never, ever uncovered again until the work of Klaus Schmidt in 1994.
Linda, we're unfortunately out of time. Wow, what an awesome show. So appreciative to have you on the show to discuss this subject matter. Of course, you can listen to today's guest at earthfiles.com. You can find everything there, podcasts, links to upcoming shows. And of course, check out the shop there for Linda's products. You have An Alien Harvest, 10,000 BC, Gobekli Tepe and Ancient Stone Circles, E.T. Terraforming ? Great subject matter, Linda. Of course, Mysterious Lights and Crop Circles as well. You can check out DVDs, books, get over to earthfiles.com and check out the blog as well. There's a prolific amount of information there. It's a great place to hang out and do some research. and Linda provides a wealth of that there for all to see. So, you have an official opening to come back anytime, Linda.
Maybe we'll do an Earth Cycles show next time, but for now, Linda, it has been an absolute pleasure talking to you and exciting as well.
Well, thank you, James, and onward with Capricorn and Earth Files and all of us trying to tell the truth. Medicine, and when you have that as your context and your ground, 11 years later, in 1979, I'm director of special projects at the CBS station in Denver, Colorado. And that is when there was an upsurge in headlines in local media, not just in Colorado, but the surrounding region going up into Canada. But because I was based in Denver, I was paying attention to an increase in headlines again about what were described as the bloodless, trackless animal mutilations. And it was one of those moments in life you do not know that your curiosity to get to the bottom of what might be an environmental contamination story is going to take you on a path through an Alice in Wonderland mirror, and that eventually, 36 years later, now I look back, and it was the decision in September of 79 to try to get to the bottom of the bloodless, trackless animal mutilations with exactly the same approach that I have had to everything I've ever done. Go for evidence, try to go to the best experts on any subject that you can, and try to build some kind of a case that is based on fact and present it to the public. And in that case, the 90-minute special, A Strange Harvest, I had no idea of the many that I interviewed who was saying without any qualification that what was behind the global animal mutilations, and those in Colorado, were creatures from outer space or extraterrestrials. And I can still remember feeling like somebody had hit me with a 220-volt circuit. I was so shocked because there was nothing in my life of science, medicine, and the environment that prepared me for that moment, talking with a sheriff, that he would be saying that this subject that I was just beginning to investigate and was thinking that it might be some sort of an animal contamination story that the government was somehow secretly in. And he said the perpetrators are creatures from outer space. Well, over the next 9 months, all of the various people, including ranchers who had seen beams of light come down into a pasture, and there they found a mutilated animal, or others who actually saw in Oregon, in a very remote area, saw it was one of the cattle being raised up in a beam of light and then found later mutilated. And hearing stories from rancher after rancher saying, I saw this red, orange, fiery looking sphere over my barn. I thought the barn was on fire. I run out screaming for people to come help me. And the
that I can't go into today. It's as best as I can read out. But for the moment, you can follow along on earthfiles.com. That's Linda's website, earthfiles.com. You can read all about Linda there and the journalism that she does. And today, we're going to get into what kickstarted this all off for Linda, and also hopefully touch on Gobekli Tepe. So without further ado, let's bring on today's guest. Hi Linda, you're very welcome to the show.
Well, thank you very much, and congratulations for doing Capricorn Radio and sharing with audiences some of these subjects that are not reaching people with the facts that they should.
Like I said just before we came on air, you're one of the top journalists in this field. Linda, been all around the world, chasing down stories, looking for the scoop. And these are the stories and the matters that others don't want to touch, other journalists. And either they're afraid, but what I like about you though, Linda, is that you don't drop your brain out. You look for the source material. You look for the heart of the story, you analyse it rationally and logically, and, I have to lay credit to you. You're one of a kind in that respect, and quite a tenacious career you've had.
Well, James, if you go back to when I graduated from Stanford University, and my focus was on producing documentaries that included for the Stanford University Medical Center, for the Stanford Linear Accelerator, and then I was covering hard news in science and environment. And
hi everybody, welcome back to Capricorn Radio. This is your host James, and I am super excited about today's guest. We are going to be speaking to journalist Linda Moulton Howe. Important that I do a full biography on Linda today. She is a prolific researcher, a graduate of the Stanford University with a master's degree in communication. She's devoted her life to documentary film, television and radio, to productions concerning science, medicine and the environment. Ms. Howe has received local, national and international awards, including 3 regional Emmys and a national Emmy nomination. Those films have included Poison in the Wind and A Sun-Kissed Poison, which compared smog pollution in Los Angeles and Denver. Fire in the Water about hydrogen was an alternative energy source to fossil fuels. A Radioactive Water about uranium contamination of public drinking water in Denver suburbs. And A Strange Harvest, which explored the worldwide animal mutilation mystery, which has haunted the United States and other countries from the mid-20th century to date. Linda has also received honours as a medical producer in Boston's WCVB Station Excellence Peabody Award, receiving the Aviation and Space Writers Association Award for Writing Excellence in Television, Sigma Delta Chi Excellence in Journalism Award, a Chicago Film Festival Golden Plaque for A Radioactive Water, a National Emmy Award nomination for Poison in the Wind and A Sun-Kissed Poison. There is so much to Linda's biography.
Yeah, James, at the beginning in September of 79, that 9 months later, 18 hours a day, just laying down to get some rest. That's all, because it was that totally overwhelming and absorbing to try to deal with everything that was happening, work with a crew, be on the road for a month, trying to move day to day to day to news. It was like making an ethnographic documentary. And at the end, when I look back, one of the voices in all of that work that I did over those 9 months, one of the first voices was the one that set me on, I think, the most accurate journey in terms of Sheriff. He was had just retired. It was Sheriff Tex Graves from Logan County. And I went up to see him, my very first interview without camera, before we went on the road. And in an office, it was a vacuum cleaner shop that he had started after retiring from the sheriff's office. So he was a little bit more able to talk with me, quite frankly. Mm-hmm. And he showed me a lot of Polaroid photos that he had personally taken of the bloodless, trackless, bizarre animal mutilations. And he said to me, "Let me save you some time, Linda. The perpetrators of these animal mutilations are creatures from outer space." That was the first voice